Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the host of this evening's program for the Mark Twain House Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And so happy to see so many people here and so many of you chiming in on the chat, letting us know where you're from. That's always so gratifying to see how these virtual programs reach people all over the place. And we're really happy to have you here for what is going to be a wonderful conversation based on the experience I've had in the green room and in our tech runs with Ray and Charles. You're in for a real treat. And I'm not going to make you wait too long to get to that conversation. I just have a few remarks to make. First of all, again, welcome on behalf of not just the Mark Twain House and Museum, but also the Amistad Center for Art and Culture, our co-sponsor for tonight's program. And they've been good friends and good partners to the Mark Twain House for so long, and we're really delighted to be presenting this program with the Amistad Center. I see you're all chatting away and keep chatting throughout the program. I would ask you, though, if you have a question for the Q&A session toward the end of the program, if you would be so kind as to place that in the Ask a Question area at the bottom of the screen. I see there's already one question there. It's a good start. Keep them coming. Another thing you can do down there is look at the questions that other people have posted. And if you have the same one, you can upvote it. And then we'll know that more than one person wants to hear the answer to that one. At the very top of the chat, and I will repost it in just a moment, there is an opportunity, a link through which you can order your very own signed copy of the book we're talking about tonight, Buses Are A-Comin' by Charles Person with Richard Rooker. It's a fascinating book, and we know we're no dummies. We know that you can order that elsewhere, but if you do order it by clicking that link, number one, you'll get a signed copy, and thank you, Jacques, for reposting that. But also, you know that your purchase benefits the Mark Twain House and Museum, and it really is a big help to us or to the museum. So while we're talking about supporting the museum, I'd like to direct your attention to that long green button that says your support is vital. Tonight's donations will be split evenly between the Mark Twain House and Museum and the Amistad Center for Art and Culture. And I just want to say that on behalf of both of those organizations, every single penny that you are able to share with us is put to very, very good use, and every single penny is very deeply appreciated. So thank you in advance for any help you can offer along those lines. I'd also like to thank tonight's sponsors. Like all of our virtual programs, tonight's is sponsored by the Wish You Well Foundation and by our media sponsor, Connecticut Public WNPR. It's produced in part with support honoring the legacy of Frank Lord, a beloved, late trustee of the Mark Twain House and Museum, and it's really a privilege to offer these programs in his honor. If you want to see more about upcoming programs at the Mark Twain House, go to marktwainhouse.org. I was just talking to Jacques earlier, and there are tons and tons all the way through May at this point. So you'll want to keep an eye on marktwainhouse.org to make sure that you don't miss anything. So having said all of that, I'd like to introduce our guests. Professor Ray Arsenault is the author of Freedom Riders, 1961, and The Struggle for Racial Justice. And this is not his first appearance here with the Mark Twain House. He's been with us before, and he's a wonderful, wonderful friend of the Twain House. So we're glad to have him back. Charles Person is a civil rights movement pioneer and author of the new memoir, Buses Are A-Comin'. At 18, he was the youngest of the original Freedom Riders, key figures in the U.S. civil rights movement, who left Washington, D.C. by bus in 1961, headed for New Orleans. This purposeful mix of Black and white, male and female activists, including future Congressman John Lewis, Congress of Racial Equality Director James Farmer, Reverend Benjamin Elton Cox, journalist and pacifist James Peck, and Corps Field Secretary Genevieve Hughes, set out to discover whether America would abide by a Supreme Court decision that ruled segregation unconstitutional in bus depots, waiting areas, restaurants, and restrooms nationwide. So please join me in welcoming Ray Arsenault and Charles Person, and give me just a moment to get them both back up on screen. And here's Charles Person and Ray Arsenault. Welcome, Ray. Welcome, Charles. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. It's really a great honor to be part of this.
And Ray, will you let me know when it's time to come back up and help with the Q&A?
I will. Guess we have about a half an hour, Charles, for our discussion, and I just want to say it's great to see you. First of all, this is, I guess, what we'll have to do with it for the 60th anniversary of the rides, which we all thought we would have last year, but COVID intervened. And just want to say at the outset that I'm so proud of you for finishing this book and for making it available to the people. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful creation, and your voice just shines through and on every page. And I know there were a number of freedom riders over the years who talked about doing memoirs of the rides, but very, very few were in a position to actually do it. And so you should be really proud of yourself. And it's such a fine piece of work. And without these kinds of books, we historians couldn't do anything. So you're our great resource. I think maybe the place where we might start is at the beginning with your early involvement in the Atlanta student movement. I don't know that in my interviews with you, I ever really got to talk to you at length about that. And of course, it's in the book, but I think it'd be wonderful to share with our audience about how you got involved as a teenager in this movement in Atlanta.
Well, in Atlanta, I had ideas that I wanted to go to certain schools, and I had a major that was very limited in the 60s. And in fact, there was no undergraduate graduate degree in nuclear engineering or in nuclear physics. So after I applied to MIT and I was accepted, but then it was too far away, plus the tuition was a lot more. Georgia Tech had just come online, and I say, hey, I'll just go to Georgia Tech. Tuition there was like $375 a semester, and that was doable. But they decided they didn't want me. But they had a unique way of rejecting you. They didn't say that you weren't qualified academically. What they did is they included 3 extra sheets in the application process, the 3 blue sheets, and you had to have 2 members of the alumni to recommend you, plus you had to be certified as a bona fide member of the county. Well, that getting to be bona fide resident, that was no problem. But in that day, for me to get 2 white members of the alumni to recommend me was an impossibility. So I decided to go to Morehouse. Morehouse was, the tuition there was like $350 a semester. And when I got on campus, it was exciting. The student movement had, the freedom student movement had started in North Carolina with the sit-ins, and it was just great. But they wouldn't allow freshmen to participate. So I had to wait. And after the campaign moved into high gear in early 1961, that's when they allowed freshmen to participate. And we had a jail no bail, and we had a massive sit-in. And we had one of the first marches we had. It was like 5,000 students marching into Atlanta, 2 by 2, singing songs. And we really made an impression on the city that, hey, we had the bodies, but we were nonviolent and we were very successful.
Yes. Do you remember that first moment when you actually took the step of sort of thinking outside the box in a sense, and actually thinking of yourself as an activist or as a protester? I assume that probably wasn't a role you had filled before.
Well, I think things were so bad in the South because our lives were dominated by signs that said, colored, white, restrooms, we only serve colored, takeout. I mean, our lives were dominated by the signs. So, the feeling was we had to do something. There have been others who have done things in the past. We had the near impressions of what happened during the Montgomery bus boycott. And we also knew the impact that Emmett Till had on us. So all these things these dynamic things were happening around on the campus. And you had kids from all over the country who were congregating. So, and we were beginning to talk and share things. And I think that gave us the impetus to want to make change. Now, we weren't optimistic that we were going to change the world, but we were hoping that whatever efforts we made would make a difference, a little difference, or any difference at all.
What was your family's initial response to this? What kind of encouragement or lack of encouragement did you get at the outset?
Well, the men in the family were very supportive. My mother, like all mothers, was concerned. And many times I didn't quite tell her the whole truth. And until near the end, I finally leveled with her and told her the truth. But mothers are concerned about where you're eating, what you're eating, who you're, all those little kinds of things, the logistics. So, but my dad and my grandfather, they were able to console her enough to realize that, hey, it's okay. Charlie's going to be all right. And that's basically how it went. But it was, and I had a lot of brothers and sisters too, and they were concerned, especially when I went to jail. No one had ever gone to jail, not in spending any length of time. So that was kind of different for us too.
Yeah. What did you seek anybody's advice on any of this? I mean, were there trusted friends, or did you have a minister or a teacher or anyone that you sort of shared your thoughts about entering into this world with, or you just kind of came to the decision yourself?
Well, I think it was basically I was in several clubs. I was in the math club, and where you come across kids from all over. The Greek organizations, the Panhellenic Council, had a luncheon where they brought in some of the superlatives throughout the city, and we got to meet each other, and we realized that it was a bounty crop of very young, talented people, and a lot of them went on to do a lot of wonderful things in this country. But I think that was the start, where they brought together all the valedictorian and salutatorians throughout the city, all the up and rising seniors and juniors. And this was an annual thing where they brought us all together, and we gave us a chance to introduce ourselves. And later on, when you started classes, you met these people and you already had some knowledge of them and some of their aspirations.
I know later, when you became a freedom rider, of course, you spent some time in Washington being trained in nonviolence and at the Fellowship House, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm curious if you had any training at all at the outset when you got involved in the student movement in Atlanta, of the importance of keeping the discipline of nonviolence, of not striking back, of sort of keeping your cool.
Well, you have to realize that Dr. King, was a native Atlanta. He had moved back to Atlanta, and Lonnie King, who was the president of our movement, they were communicants at the same church, and Lonnie encouraged Dr. King to join us in October of 1960 when they were both arrested. And that arrest, when the Kennedys contacted the Coretta Scott King, which changed the course of voting credentials in Atlanta. But we had been trained in nonviolence by way of Dr. King, so it wasn't like we were cold.
Right. So tell me how you discovered about the possibility of becoming a freedom rider. That obviously the event that changed your life forever.
Well, after we were successful in Atlanta, the Congress of Racial Equality realized there were a lot of kids throughout the country who were trained in nonviolence, and they wanted to tap into that resources. So they sent out a request that, hey, join the Freedom Rides. Well, nobody knew what a Freedom Ride was back then, but at that time, we would have gone anywhere, anytime to fight segregation. And this way we could do it on a national level, on a larger scale. And that was one of the reasons. But being so young, I didn't think my chances of being accepted was very good. And for years and years and years, I wondered, why did they choose me? And I think, I guess in the last 10 years, I realized that they wanted people who were squeaky clean. In other words, I hadn't lived long enough to do anything to have any negatives in my background. Because the media in those days, any negative, whether you were, if you were homosexual, if you were a communist, or anything they thought was negative, they would use against the organization. So CORE made sure that no one had those kind of items in their background. And because there were other people in Atlanta who were just as skilled as I was and had gone to jail and done as many sit-ins as I had. So it was not like I had the only credentials. There were a lot of folks who were eminently qualified to be accepted.
Yeah, I always wondered about why you were chosen to represent the Atlanta movement, but that makes a lot of sense. Of course, being 18, you had to get your parents' permission. In the early Freedom Rides, you actually had to fill out the form and all of that and get them to sign on, which of course Bernard Lafayette, your good buddy, couldn't. His parents wouldn't sign on because they said, "We're not going to sign your death warrant." But how did your parents react?
Well, like I said, I didn't tell Mom the whole truth. I just told her I was going to D.C. for advanced training in nonviolence, and the men convinced her it was okay. I eventually told her the whole story. In fact, I didn't level with her until May 13th when we came to Atlanta the night before we left out. I stayed at home, and I was able to tell her that, well, I had the advanced training, but we're going to test these facilities throughout until we get to New Orleans. And I'm glad I did, because the next day all hell broke loose. And I don't know, she took it rough even though I had leveled with her. I can imagine what it would have been if she had not known what we were going to do.
Oh, sure. I'm sure she'd be terrified. So tell me what you remember about those days in Washington at Fellowship House when you and the other original riders got ready to head into the heart of darkness, so to speak, on May 4th.
For me, that was an eye-opener, because in Atlanta, we had very few whites to participate. So when I got to D.C., I saw these white people, and I'm saying, what are they doing here? And, will they have my back? Can I depend on them? On and on and on, all the kind of, skeptical, I was just skeptical because I had never had their relationships before. Mm-hmm. But boy, did I realize, oh yeah. And the Bergmans, they were the oldest Freedom Riders. And they said, well, we're going to take care of you. And that was prophetic in a lot of ways, and created some memories that I will never forget. But, I realized that the bond that we established just in those 3 days, which lasted through the rest of their lives, is just amazing, that the level of commitment that these people brought to the Freedom Rides and to the movement altogether.
I can just imagine meeting people like Jim Peck, who was on the original Journey of Reconciliation back in 1947 and had been an activist since the 30s. Must have been really eye-opening. Do you remember anything about the final dinner, the so-called Last Supper, when you went to the Chinese restaurant the night before you left?
Well, I didn't go to the Last Supper because I was not a very venturesome when it comes to eating. And also, I understand they had adult beverages in 18. I wasn't involved in adult beverages. So I stayed back at the Quaker House there. And the lady there who ran the house, she made wonderful black bread. And we sat there and with coffee and black bread and butter, and we just talked the whole evening. And that was my preparation for that last day. But now I think back, I probably should have gone with them regardless of the circumstances. But I don't regret it, because, like I say, the memories of working with that lady and how they ran the Quaker House there, it was just remarkable.
Well, as you know, maybe just as well you didn't go to the dinner, because Jim Farmer kind of shocked everybody at the end when he said, well, you don't really have to show up tomorrow morning. We won't shame you. Nobody will say anything. And of course, then he realized he'd overdone it a bit, and he was worried that when he got there in the morning, that nobody would be there at the bus station. But at least you were there, that's for sure. And, for people who've read about the Freedom Rides and maybe seen the American Experience film, and hopefully will read your book, will know that the first week of the Freedom Rides was fairly uneventful. I mean, John Lewis was beaten in Rock Hill, but you was fairly smooth sailing until you got to Atlanta. And of course, you were kind of, in some ways, the host there. You were the only Atlanta Freedom Rider, and because you said you stayed at home. How much did you know about what was likely to happen to you once you crossed the Alabama line? as you know, they tried to get Dr. King to go with you guys, and he said, "Thanks, but no thanks." I don't. I hear all these rumblings of what's going to happen, and I think you probably shouldn't go. And of course, being good nonviolent activists, they had to go. You don't let violence chase you back. Did you have any inkling what was going to happen in Anniston and Birmingham?
Well, when we got to Atlanta that evening, we had lunch at dinner with them, Dr. King and his staff, and he talked to me at Lynn, how they were treating me, how the riot was going, all that. And he says, we had hoped that he would join us, and he didn't want to join us. He says, I understand that danger awaits you in Alabama. He says, in fact, the word is you guys won't make it out of Alabama. Now, we have a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. King, but we had a job to do. And, as I reflect back on it, it was probably a good thing, because if they had known that Dr. King was on that ride, I mean, if it could have gotten any worse, it would have gotten worse.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing. And I later found out from Ambassador Young that, Dr. King, after Atlanta adventure, I don't know if you know the circumstances around his arrest in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, of course.
He realized that, that he could be moved at any time. When he's in the hand of law enforcement, they could do anything with you at any time they wanted to. So he became very selective after that when he would be arrested, and on the circumstances that he would like to control the circumstances on his incarceration and stuff like that. So that made a difference.
There was great fear that he might be killed at Reidsville before. That's right. After he was arrested at Rich's department store. Yeah. So you were fortunate to be on the Trailways and not on the Greyhound. So you weren't on the bus that got bombed in Anniston. You guys actually made it all the way to Birmingham, but then all hell broke loose, right? If you maybe describe briefly for us what happened when you pulled into the station in Birmingham on Mother's Day?
Well, we had first been beat. They beat us on the bus in Anniston, and our bus driver was warned that a mob awaited our bus, and so he took an alternate route into Birmingham. They firebombed our bus. I don't think that we would have had the energy or the strength to get off a burning bus, because they pretty well beat us up on the bus. But when we got to Birmingham, James Peck and I, we were the designated testers, and he was, he was a bleeder, and he was bloodied, but he still wanted to go. So I said, let's go. And when we entered the waiting room, the entire wall of men came towards us. I mean, they had everything. They had sticks, they had guns. One guy had a gun and the pipes. And I think James went down almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And I guess I, being younger, I was able to maintain my balance until there was a photograph that was taken. And when the flash went off, it startled them, and they just turned me loose. And I simply walked out of the terminal out to the street. And as luck would have it, or fate, a city bus came by. I get on the bus, and I told the driver, take me somewhere. And he drove about 2 blocks, and he says, if you go across the tracks, there'll be someone there to help you. Well, if you know anything about the rural South, Black folks always lived across the tracks. Why? In those days, trains burned coal, and coal produces soot, which is a powdery black substance that seems to get on everything. So I went across the track, and I found a phone booth. Now, that's the little thing that they use instead of the cell phone. If we had cell phones in those days, boy, it would have been great. But I found a phone booth, and I had been given that day a Reverend Shuttlesworth number, which normally I would have put in my diary, in my jacket. But for some reason, I put it in my coat pocket, in my pants pocket. And if I had put it in my diary, I wouldn't have had no way to contact anyone. But I took this little scrap of paper they had given me that morning. I called Reverend Shuttlesworth, and I told him what had happened, that I was alone and we all needed help. And he sent 3 deacons for me. And the landmarks I gave them, they were able to find me in a readily found me. And they saw me, and they saw the blood, and they says, yeah, you need to go to your doctor. So there were 3 Black doctors in Birmingham, and all 3 refused to treat me. So they had a nurse at the church, and he said, well, maybe she can take care of you. and she did.
Yeah, wow. I've often thought that scene when you and Jim Peck have to get off the bus, that there are a lot of things about the Freedom Rides that are almost like a Hollywood script. But the fact that it was the two of you the youngest, he's the veteran, one white, one black. You couldn't make these things up sometimes. It was just extraordinary, and how you were able to escape and with your life, really, because that's I think the idea behind Bull Connor's kind of agreement with the Klan was to beat you guys nearly, not to kill you, but to scare you so much that no Freedom Rider would ever come to Alabama again. So you eventually you gathered at the parsonage at Bethel Baptist with Reverend Shuttlesworth, trying to figure out what to do next, right? Do you remember that whole scene there at his parsonage?
Well, after we got everybody back together again, we decided we'd take a vote. We decided we will continue the Freedom Rides. However, there'll be one change. We'll do it on one bus. We all take the Greyhound, and we will have the two bus tactic. And the next day, we went to the Greyhound bus station, but no driver would take us. None of them would. They said that they didn't want their bus burned. They didn't want to be killed. They weren't Freedom Riders or anything. Plus, the Teamsters got into it and to suppress them, their ability to take us out of Birmingham. So we opted to fly. And we went to the airport. We purchased tickets. We finally were asked to board. We get on the plane, bomb threat. Then we have to deplane. We get back inside and we wait. We get back on the plane, another bomb threat. Now it's beginning to look, wow, will we ever get out of Birmingham? But with the help of Mr. Siegenthaler, who was an aide of the Kennedy administration, he came and he expedited our flight out of Birmingham. And that's how we were able to make it to New Orleans for our rally. We were early, but we were, that's what we were doing.
Do you remember, John Siegenthaler tells an incredible story about he finally got you out of there and you're on the plane and you land in New Orleans and there was a cordon of state police and others who were supposedly protecting you from the white mob, but in fact, he said, we're just screaming horrible racial epithets at you, and he said it was just a sickening scene. Do you remember that?
Oh boy, do I remember. When we left Birmingham, in those days, the planes were out on the tarmac. You didn't have the jetways or anything. So you had to walk out to the plane. Well, when we left Birmingham, they had this crowd of Klansmen and their girlfriends and what have you. They were taunting us as we got on the plane. So when we got to New Orleans, it was the opposite. We were getting off the plane and you had the policemen and they were taunting us. It was a heck of a day, So
just incredible.
Those were our great first responders,
Yeah, well, of course, it's always amazing that Senator Barry Goldwater happened to be there at the time. I don't know if you saw him, but he, being a conservative Republican, but even he was just sickened by what he saw, by the way you were being treated. But you finally made it on May 17th, the 7th anniversary of the Brown decision, and there was the rally at Mount Zion Church. I know you spoke. Do you remember that scene when you were all more or less safe, it seemed, and you actually got to New Orleans on the day you didn't get there the way you wanted to, of course, but you got there. Do you have any memories of that rally and where you spoke and the others spoke? It
was a great gathering, and I think mainly because of the hospitality of the New Orleans people. I stayed with I stayed at one of the universities, and then the remaining days I stayed with a Honduran family there, and it was just a wonderful exchange of ideas and feelings because they were supportive of us. They were encouraging, and everything was great except it was tinged with the fact that we couldn't continue to rise. But we did find out before we left there that the young people in Nashville were ready and prepared to continue to rise because they didn't want the rise to end on a violent note where violence would deter us from protesting. So that was the encouraging thing about it because we were disappointed that we could not, continue the rides.
Oh, I know. It must have been very bittersweet for you to get there in the way you did. I remember when we recreated the ride in 2011 with PBS and all the 40 college students, and spent 10 days going from Washington to New Orleans, and you and your wife were with us all the way. It was with several other Freedom Riders, but I think it's one of the most memorable scenes I can remember in my entire life when we got there, had that kind of New Orleans style welcome with the street band and people cheering for you, and so you finally got to New Orleans in the way you wanted to, and then I don't know I don't think you knew. I did not know what was going to happen when you got off the bus. I think you were in a walker, and then and you were, of course, the youngest rider and one of the original riders, and they released the dove in your honor. You remember that, into the sky? Yes. It wasn't a dry eye in the street, really. It was just I know I was crying, you were crying, everybody was crying, because it was such an incredible moment. So you must have had a real sense of triumph and satisfaction, and that all those sacrifices maybe were worth it after all.
Yeah, that was quite well. I still keep up with a lot of those students. I don't know if you do or not, but
oh yeah,
they're just amazing, and I'm so amazed at their accomplishments. So that's another high mark in my life. To have the original ride, but also to have the student Freedom Riders and the things we shared.
Well, I think you and the other riders inspired them. I mean, they've gone on to do some amazing things, and they're Freedom Riders in their own right. I know after all of this, you back in '61, that you ended up in the Marines, and I've always wondered. I never asked you this before, but if you had any mixed feelings about going through what you went through, and then fighting in a war. Fighting for your country. Did you have any conflicting feelings about the way you'd been treated and what you were being asked to do, to sacrifice once again for your country?
Well, let me explain how I got there. After the riots, I was subpoenaed to testify against all those men in the photograph in Birmingham. And I spent 2 weeks in Montgomery, since that's the county seat and that's where the trial was held. And of course, they were all exonerated. I returned home, and my mother was concerned. She was afraid. She knew I was going to stay in the movement. And she was so afraid that I'd be killed if I stayed in the movement. So she says to me, Tony, why don't you join the Army? Well, since I hadn't been totally honest with her initially, I figured I owed her that much. I said, well, I explored the Army. They were trying to recruit me for West Point, but I had taken all the tests to get into West Point, and I saw an article on the Marine Corps Reserve, and I said, well, I want to be a Marine. So I went down and I volunteered to be a Marine, and I couldn't get in because I had what happened to my case in Atlanta when I was arrested. They didn't try the case, but they put it on a dead docket. So I was prohibited from leaving the state. So my recruiter went down and begged them and says, well, hey, I guess they're going to get rid of this one if you get him out of here for you.
You were a dangerous felon.
Yeah. So they convinced the courts that I would be okay. And so they inducted me into the Marine Corps. And then there were some challenges there too, because my grandfather who was not nonviolent, had taught all the boys in the family how to shoot, and we all shot well, and we all eventually, when we went into the military, we were all expert marksmen. So my drill instructor, he loved the fact that I could shoot and run and do all that kind of stuff. But when he found out I had the highest IQ in the platoon, or the GCT is what they call it in those days, he tried to force me out. But had he known I was a Freedom Rider, there's no way he would have known that I was not a quitter, and there was no way he could have forced me out.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly kind of an only in America quality to this, I think, that not quite the way Mahatma Gandhi planned it out about nonviolent protest, that you end up as a Marine Corps sharpshooter. But God works in mysterious ways, I guess. Sometimes.
Yeah, I did one interview several years back, and the guy in a local newspaper quote says, he knows a lot about the Bible, but he can shoot too. So,
did your the other soldiers with you in the Marines, did they know you were a Freedom Rider, that you had gone through what you'd gone through? Did you share that with them?
not in. It's kind of hard to. I don't know if the adult version of the answer is this. No, they knew that I was different, and like in Vietnam, it was sort of a thing like this. That in guy, that nigga is crazy, but he'll keep you alive. So that's the kind of relationship they respected me. I had a tremendous job in the Marine Corps, and in Vietnam, I saved a lot of lives, and also it took a lot of lives. So, so I had a great rapport with even the Southerners with their rebel flags and stuff. Even in Vietnam, we got along. It was more than it wasn't like being tolerated. There was mutual respect.
So it wasn't a full Jim Crow experience then. You had
Right.
There's some positives to it. Sounds like
lots.
for sure. And then after you got out in 1981, you spent 3 years in Cuba. I think you were preparing for your life to become a major motion picture or something, all this drama. But so tell us about those Cuba years before you came back to Atlanta.
Well, I had a very, like I said, I had a very unique job. When I got to Cuba, there was some special things going on with Castro and with the drug trafficking from Colombia and all that stuff. And my MOS of my job, I was basically, I made sure that the equipment used for surveillance of all those entities out there, whether they're telephone systems or radios or what have you, were in working order. So when I asked to retire, they didn't require me to leave. They said I could stay right on the island. I retired there, and I ran an electronic business there for 3 years because we helped with our allies. We had Haitians that came there. We had Jamaicans and Santo Domingo. From all the Caribbean area, people would come to the base there on Guantanamo Bay, and we were there to provide all sorts of service and support in the electronic area. And that's basically what I did while I was there. Met a lot of wonderful people, and basically that's my life. I just have met a tremendous amount of people throughout the world, and that keeps me going because no matter how grim things look, I know that there are a lot of good people around. And, they're good to work with.
Well, Charles, I know that you attract them too. I mean, I think anyone who's ever known you admires you, and you're just a wonderful person to be around, and you're a person of great substance. So you had another career though, right? Coming back to Atlanta and working in IT for the school system for years and years.
Oh yeah, that was interesting because, I think the learning and computers have really dominated. IT has dominated classroom instructions, but also I realized that it was always good to go into a classroom because the system here was kind of, I don't know how you explain it. I mean, you go to some schools, there were no males instructors. I went to one school, there was no males at all. Even the janitors were female. And we made a difference, and we tried to open up dialogue, not only in our job, but in, at the Atlanta Board at the board meetings, in PTA meetings, to make a change because we had some schools that had 6 members in the PTA. How can you have a school of hundreds of kids and only 6 people concerned enough to be involved? So there was a lot of things we were doing underneath to work. And fortunately, we had a great group of people at that time who wanted to make a difference. And I think we really did, because we did turn out a lot of good students who've gone on to achieve some great things.
Yeah, I don't doubt it at all. I think in just a moment, they want us to maybe open it up to questions, and we'll bring Jennifer back in. But is there anything before we get to that you'd like to say that about your life and experiences? Anything at all? You'll have some time during question and answers, of course, to say whatever you'd like. But I'd like to give you the last word here.
What I like to share is that the Bergman said they were going to take care of me. And the first time Dr. Bergman came to my aid was on the bus when we were being beaten. And when he came to our aid, they knocked him to the floor of the bus and they began to stomp him in his chest. And Frances, his wife, if she had not begged him, they probably would have killed him on the bus. Yeah. But when we got to Birmingham, he heard found out that James Peck and I were in trouble. And he came to try to help us. And he got knocked down. And here you have this 62-year-old man crawling on his hands and knees to try to provide aid for us. I mean, that kind of loyalty I have never seen before, and I can never forget it.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man, and of course could have been killed easily during the ride, but and he was crippled for life, but he lived to be 99 years old. I always thought that was a wonderful compensation that he stuck in there. So he was a great person to have your back for sure. Yeah. Well, Jennifer, if you could come back and help us with the questions and answers, we'd really appreciate it.
I'd be happy to. And let me say first, what a delight to listen to the two of you talk. The substance and content, obviously, so compelling, but the way the two of you, as old friends, people have known each other for a long time, relate to one another is really amazing to see and listen to. So thank you for sharing that part of this with us as well. And we have some great questions from the audience. I'm going to jump right in. So Suzanne Murphy said, I'm shocked that the Black doctors refuse to treat you or treat anybody. Could someone say more about that? Well, something you'd like to talk about?
I guess doctors are licensed by the state, and they considered us as outside agitators. And they felt that had they treated us, me and others, that they would lose their license. And at first I was upset, but once I realized that they were more important to the community after we left, and it became okay. I have forgiven them because I understand now. Because you have to realize there's a big picture, and sometimes we can't get caught up in our own little world. And I understand, but at the time I needed help because, like I say, everyone who saw me says, "Hey, you need to see a doctor," and thank God for that nurse.
If I could interject, the skittishness went beyond doctors, of course, Black doctors, because when the Freedom Rides were originally arranged, they sent a scout ahead to try to see if there were churches that would put the Freedom Riders up and places where they could speak. And they were lucky if they found one church in a community. That there was a kind of sense that these people are going to come in and stir up all the trouble. They're going to get the Klan all riled up. Then they're going to leave town and leave us with this incredible mess. Yeah. So not all the Black communities were necessarily welcoming to the Freedom Riders. Later, of course, they became considered to be great heroes. But at the time, as Charles said, they were just outside agitators, stirring things up and creating problems for the people who live there.
That is a really important and interesting insight. Thank you for sharing that. It gives us some perspective. So just Merle Holloman has asked us kind of a follow-up to somebody else's question. What years did the experiences you are talking about happen in? Maybe more than one person wants to know that. Can you share? Let's clarify that for us, please.
Well, the Freedom Ride started in May of 1961. And by the end of the year, we had accomplished what we had set out to do. It took a lot. And, we started off with 13 riders, Black, white, male, female, and we ended up with 436 riders. 50% was white, 50% was Black, and 1/4 were women. So we multiplied.
Yeah, half from the north, half from the south, and but it's all concentrated in the spring and summer and fall of 1961. Although the impact is enormous because it essentially triggers the whole kind of citizen action culture of the 1960s. It's often, I think, many people now realize that you wouldn't have gotten the movements that you got later in the way that they were constituted without the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides are kind of the template of these troublemakers like Charles, right? Good trouble, as John Lewis said.
John Lewis said.
Good trouble.
But it changed American politics forever, and.
It's interesting that it's such a relatively short time period, that I think many of us might have assumed that it went on longer than that. And so one of the questions is, and this comes from somebody whose name is not here, so sorry about that. What do you know of early freedom rides like the Journey of Reconciliation in the mid-1940s with Bayard Rustin and Wally Nelson?
Well, James Peck was the only participant of the Journey of Reconciliation that were with us. So he brought a wealth of knowledge and experience with him. Plus, like Ray had said earlier, the scouting that went on before the rides, the cities that we were going to stop in, the churches or the college, all those things were laid out, which made it a lot better. And that's really made it successful. Now, we were aware of the Green Book, but the thing is, when you had the number of people that we had each night having to be put up, it was an enormous task. And it's really just shows you how wonderful the people were, because here we were traveling. They didn't know us. They put us up. They fed us. And we had no problems whatsoever. And I know my mom, that was one of her concerns, who we were staying with, who were they eating, and all those kinds of things. So that made it easier for those of us who had relatives outside of the movement to understand that we were being cared for in a very good manner and a safe manner.
Yeah, just briefly, the Journey of Reconciliation was also a core program. Yeah. It was its first big program in April 1947, the same week that Jackie Robinson broke the color line in Major League Baseball. And that's why they didn't get as much publicity as they might have. And they only went to the Upper South. They only went to Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And they were all male. And a number of them ended up on the chain gang in North Carolina. They thought that would be the first of, they didn't use the word freedom ride, but it would be the first of a number of these freedom rides. But the Cold War intervened, and the Corps had to essentially go underground in the 1950s prior to the Montgomery bus boycott. And Jim Farmer was one of the founders of Corps back in 1942. He was not with them in 1947. He always regretted that he missed the freedom ride. He became the head of Corps in 1961. He got his second chance, and so he jumped at the idea of having, they called it a freedom ride, not just a journey of reconciliation, but they were going to raise all kinds of help themselves. They did.
Thank you for that. So we have another great question from Kimberly Kersey, who I will tell you is the executive director of the Amistad Center for Art and Culture. So thank you for your question, Kimberly. Thanks for being here tonight and for co-sponsoring this wonderful talk with the Mark Twain House. Kimberly says, you mentioned the reaction of the photo flash stopping the mob from further attack on you. Today, many racist attacks are captured on cell phone video. Why do you think the current reality of being caught on film doesn't seem to deter bad actors? That's a great question, Kimberly. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know. I guess it's become a part of the culture. You go to any event, you got cell phones everywhere, and you got those from high resolution to just ones that take the old flip phones. And I just think it's a part of a culture nowadays, and we just assume. But if it hadn't been for those cell phone video, we would not have known the extent of the George Floyd incident and several of the others. So thank God for cell phone video and photos.
Yeah, I think we have a culture of exhibitionism now, and that I think contributes to it. But in Charles's case, there in the Birmingham station, there's been some controversy. There's a famous photograph, and we're not absolutely certain. I think Charles is pretty certain that he's there, but you see him through a bunch of bodies. There was another man who was also beaten in very similar fashion, and we just had to take there are just a few photo journalists who were there to take these pictures, and we don't have. If we'd had cell phones, we would have. Maybe the trials would have been different, Charles. Maybe they would have been able to convict those people if they had more views of it. But
well, they did. All right. Well, his was funny. The FBI did identify. That's how I knew it was me. They had an enlargement of that photo. I had never seen anything. It was like a poster at the trial, and of course, if you could see the shoes and you could see the feet. The other gentleman who was beaten that they referred to. He was beaten out trying to get his luggage from underneath the bus, and he was a Birmingham native. He would not have gone where we went because he knew the system. So we see that picture was taken. We had actually gone into the waiting room. So, but like I said, the FBI, if you could get a copy of it, they have. It was released on microfiche, but they identified all the guys in the picture and me. So they knew the FBI. The FBI. Anna Hoover at the time didn't do a lot of service to a lot of folk, but they had a lot more information. Like, they knew what our itinerary was beforehand. They were aware
right.
Going into, but also, like I say, the aftermath, the information they had, a lot of that is still redacted even to this day.
I know. I have those page after page. Basically, most of it's black.
Yeah.
But I think you've convinced me. I think it was you. You certainly earned your stripes for that situation, that's for sure.
I wasn't proud of it. I didn't answer that welcoming.
No, you were brave.
Wow. And I can't let that pass without mentioning microfiche. When's the last time you've heard me mention microfiche? So thank you for that walk down memory lane. Another person who hasn't shared his or her name has said, how did jail no bail work? How did jail no bail work? And I don't know if they mean how was it successful or what was the mechanism?
Well, the idea was that if you were arrested, that you would not post bail, that you would serve out your sentence regardless. And a lot of people did. Many in the Freedom Rides, a lot of them started, and through the other circumstances, they may have had to, say, after 20 or 30 days, be bailed out. There were various circumstances, but the idea, the concept was to fill the jails up, make it expensive for them to house us and to feed us, even though the food wasn't, in most cases, wasn't that good. But the fact that they had to at least buy something to provide for you. It was also it was good before the other students too, because like we sang a lot of songs in those days, and the lyrics were generally changed each day to in the song to alert their other cellmates, to antagonize the guards, anything to get under their skin. But also we communicated through song, and we would let them know how many new people were coming, male, female, etc., etc. If there was going to be a mail call, all the kind of things that the students needed to know, because the system was crazy. Because in most cases, you would think, like in our case, they didn't put the students in a cell by themselves. They mixed us, so we were intermingled with regular convicts. So, we say they thought would have an impact on us, but we had an impact on them, because at times they would sing songs along with us. And, many of them couldn't understand, what would you voluntarily come to jail? They were there because they had to be. But these were the kind of things that interaction we had with, while you're being incarcerated.
Well, that's how Charles got his great book title, Buses Are Coming, which became a freedom song that they made up, warning the jailers that, I know you don't like our freedom songs now and you don't like us, but more are coming. Buses are coming. Buses are coming. Buses are coming. Oh yeah. You better get you ready. And, was a great kind of an anthem for the people in Parchman Prison and elsewhere. But I
love to hear Skip. I used to love to hear our friends sing it.
Rip
he was. Oh man, I tell you,
one of the freedom riders, Rip Patton, who was one of the most beloved freedom riders, just died a few months ago, and he on the PBS American Experience film, he sings "Buses Are Coming."
Yeah,
and he was a wonderful man, and like a lot of the freedom riders, he really got into the freedom songs. They were a huge part of the morale building and sustaining their what you think, Charles, really kept you guys together.
Yeah,
Wow.
It is.
Well, there's a lot to think about and unpack there too, in terms of the role that singing has played in other populations throughout history, and conveying information that way. That's fascinating. Taylor has a very good question. First, we joined Taylor in thanking you for your service as a Marine, Mr. Person, and for your service in the rides. And what an entertaining conversation, Taylor says. I'd love to hear your mom's reaction once you finally got home. What one or two, well, let's finish that. And then Taylor has a follow-up question. What was your mom's reaction when you finally got home?
Well, she checked my head out where the bandage was. And I think she was just elated that I was in one piece. It really was difficult for her for two reasons. And if you read the book, you'll understand why. We didn't have a phone. So, and the news cycle in the 60s was at noon, 6 o'clock, and 11 o'clock news. So you had to wait for the cycle. So my next of kin was Lonnie King, who was the president of the Atlanta Student Movement. So he was contacted, and given an update on my status and so forth. And he, in turn, had to go over to my house and let my folks know, that, the bus had been burned and we had been beaten, but nobody was dead and everything was okay. So, but I later found out in recent years that Mom did take it was very hard for her. Because like I say, it's not like she could talk to me or see, specifically what was going on. But like any mother, she was just concerned.
As a mother myself, I can understand that. I've been thinking about that a lot. What I have said, had an 18-year-old child of mine done what you did, it must have been very hard for her.
Let me share this with you, though. Before she died, several years ago, we were on a road trip taking my mother, to see my brother, who was a Vietnam vet who was dying from his service in Vietnam. And after the second road stop, along the road they have along the highway, she says to me, I'm glad you did what you did. I said, what do you mean, Mom? She says, I remember back in the day when we did these road trips, there was no rest stops and there was no restaurants that would serve us. And she said, I would have to make sandwiches and put them in a bag and we'd have them in the car. And she says, but that wasn't the hard part. She says, the hard part was when we had to potty. She said, but you guys, the boys, and you just went out in the woods and relieved yourselves. She said, but for me and the girls, we had to squat down between the doors of the car to relieve ourselves. And she said, so I'm so happy that you guys did what you did.
Oh.
That's a good son, right? Always thinking of his mother.
You'd have loved it too, Ray. She was she was very good.
All right, it's getting close to time, but there are a couple more questions I'd like to put in front of you. Are you willing to hang around for another couple minutes and answer a few more?
Sure.
Beth Lehman asked what I think many of us want to know. Charles, can you tell us about some of the decorations that you're wearing this evening?
Well, most of these were acquired while in my military service, and mostly in Vietnam. And I guess the highest rated medal I got from NSA for the work that I did prior to Cuba and in Cuba. And that's when those of us who believe those organizations were very patriotic and very wonderful organizations who did a lot of good work for this country. And I think I had the pleasure of working with some wonderful people in those agencies. And I really have a tremendous amount of faith in them because I think they keep our country safe. I know they keep our country safe.
Thank you for that good question, that great answer. Taylor again says, what one or two actions would you suggest we can take to work for equality in the present day?
Well, it's very simple. Be a friend, make a friend. I think if we just take it at that level, that elementary level, and we multiply that, then a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with today will no longer be a problem.
That's pretty simple. Thank you. And we'll just take one more from Marianne Garner. Is there one thing that came out of the rides that means the most to you out of everything? It's a tall question, but.
During the rides, I kept a diary. And in that diary, I had hoped that after the rides, I could contact the people who provided lodging and food for us and comfort during the rides. But in Birmingham, I lost my jacket. And if you look at any pictures after Birmingham, you'll see I have no jacket. And even my claim check was in there, so I had no luggage. So my second suit, I didn't have that either. By the way, there is a reward if there's a lost and found, if you can find my suitcase from 1960, I have a $500 reward for anyone who can relocate it.
Okay.
But it's the people is what I'd like people to realize. And I think in the book we try to identify a lot of people you may not have heard of, but these people gave us the best they had, and they didn't have much, but they cared for us. And we wouldn't, like Ray would say, we'd go into a town. If they'd been, they found people who would support us, and also they took love offerings, and that's how we were financed. I've had questions in recent months that, hey, they thought the Freedom Rides was financed by some major conglomerate and stuff, but we were relying on the love offerings of common people in various little communities throughout the country. And these people are the ones that I reach out to, because the rides would not have been successful without them.
No, I love that. What a great note to end on, too. Oh, I want, on behalf of our audience, I want to thank you both for just a fascinating and riveting conversation. Thank you both for being here. Thank you to the Amistad Center for Art and Culture for co-sponsoring this evening with us. Jacques has put some fascinating stuff in the chat about upcoming programs at the Twain House and exhibitions and other things at the Amistad Center. So please take a moment to click those links and get them in your browser so you can check them out at greater length. Now, I cannot imagine, if you were not already inclined to purchase Buses Are A-Comin', I can't imagine that you don't want to make that purchase now. So please follow that link, and remember that you do get a signed copy, and that your purchase supports the Mark Twain House and Museum.
It's a wonderful book. It really is. You'll love it.
Ray and Charles, thank you so much for being here this evening and sharing your story and your conversation and your relationship again with us. It's been great to have you.
Thank you. Don't forget Hank.
Charles.
Great to see you.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.